The stagecoach rattled along the rough desert path, kicking up clouds of red dust that clung to the evening air like a restless ghost. Inside, Amara Johnson, a young black schoolteacher with steady eyes and a spine shaped by hardship rather than ease, sat with her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. Every mile carried her farther from the life she'd known, and closer to a town she'd only heard about in scattered letters, Dusty Creek, a frontier settlement at the far edge of civilization. Amara had not come here for adventure or romance. She had come for survival, for renewal, for the chance to plant roots in soil that had not been poisoned by the memories she'd left behind. Rumors said Dusty Creek needed a teacher desperately. Children ran wild, learning more from saloon fights than from books. Some townsfolk welcomed the idea of a school. Others barely cared. But Amara knew children needed structure. They needed hope. And she needed purpose as much as they needed guidance. When the stagecoach wheels finally ground to a halt at the wooden platform in front of the Dusty Creek Saloon and Hotel, the air smelled of sun-baked earth, horse sweat, and the faint sweetness of prairie grass drifting in on the breeze. Amara stepped down carefully, her boots touching frontier soil for the first time. The town around her looked half forgotten. Wooden buildings worn by years of wind, a crooked church steeple in the distance, and a row of horses tied loosely along the hitching post. A few townspeople glanced up at her curious, assessing, some openly surprised. A black woman arriving alone in a place like this did not go unnoticed, but Amara held her chin steady. Fear would not guide her here. She had barely taken 3 steps toward the inn when a man's shadow fell across her path. She turned, expecting trouble. Instead, she found a pair of calm, clear, unexpectedly gentle eyes staring back at her. Caleb Hart, a tall cowboy with broad shoulders and a dust-stained hat, stood beside her luggage. He had moved so quietly she hadn't heard his boots on the boards. His voice was low, steady as a horse's heartbeat. "You headed for the inn, ma'am? I can help carry these if you'd like." His tone wasn't pushy. It wasn't flirtatious. It was respectful, something rare for a stranger, rarer still for a black woman in the West. Amara hesitated. She had learned long ago not to trust kindness too quickly. But Caleb's expression held no mockery, no judgment, only simple courtesy. She nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. As he lifted her battered trunk with surprising ease, a few nearby cowhands paused their card game to stare. Whispering started almost instantly. Some looked curious, others irritated. One muttered, "Town's changing again," under his breath, spitting into the dirt. Amara heard it. Caleb heard it too, his jaw tightening for half a second before he continued walking without responding. It was a tiny moment, but she noticed it, and some part of her deep, tired, and quietly yearning felt a flicker of unexpected safety. Inside the inn's lobby, creaking floors and the scent of warm bread greeted her. Caleb set her trunk down carefully, tipping his hat with a faint smile. "Welcome to Dusty Creek. Hope the town's kind to you." It was a simple wish, spoken sincerely. Yet in that moment, Amara felt something shift in her chest, something as fragile as a promise and as unpredictable as the frontier wind. She had arrived, and the story of her new life, whatever it held, was about to begin. Caleb Hart had seen a lot in his 31 years, dust storms that swallowed whole herds, outlaws mean enough to shoot a man over a spilled drink, and winters so cruel they turned cattle to stone. But nothing on God's earth had prepared him for the moment Amara Johnson stepped off that rattling stagecoach. He'd only wandered into town to pick up supplies, coffee beans, rifle cartridges, and to new rope things a rancher needed far more than company. He wasn't looking for anyone, certainly not someone to snag his attention the way she did. But when she descended from that coach with a steady grace and a kind of quiet fire in her eyes, Caleb felt something inside him jolt awake. Like a horse sensing the first breath of spring, Amara wasn't like the women Dusty Creek usually saw. Most frontier women dressed in faded calico, their faces tired from long years of survival. But she stood tall, her dark skin glowing warm against the golden sunset, her traveling coat tailored yet modest, her presence commanding without a single word spoken. She looked like she belonged someplace grander, someplace that recognized her worth, and Caleb wondered what road she had walked to end up in this forgotten town. He watched as she hesitated on the platform, her eyes scanning the buildings, the people, the empty stretches of land around them. A lesser woman might have looked afraid, but Amara's expression held something else: calculation, strength, a kind of resilience he recognized instantly. A woman who had weathered storms too. Caleb wasn't a man who interfered in other folks' business. He kept to himself, spoke when needed, worked hard, slept hard. But something pulled him forward, step by step, until he found himself standing beside her trunk, unable to walk past. When she turned toward him, her eyes locked with his sharp, observant, guarded, not trembling or shy, just assessing. And Caleb felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. He cleared it. "You headed for the inn, ma'am?" he said, voice steadier than he felt. "I can help carry these if you'd like." He braced himself for rejection. Women didn't take easily to strange cowboys offering help in strange towns. But she didn't bristle. She didn't shrink. She studied him a moment longer, then gave a small, gracious nod. "Thank you." The way she said it, soft, polite, but with a thread of independence woven through, struck him harder than it should have. Caleb lifted her trunk with ease. It was heavy, packed full of books, no doubt, a teacher's belongings. Something about that made him proud for Dusty Creek, like the town didn't deserve her but needed her all the same. As they walked toward the inn, Caleb felt eyes on them. He heard the whispers, heard the irritation, heard the surprise. A lone black woman in a frontier town wasn't common, and prejudice here ran deep as the riverbeds. He ignored them. Amara didn't. When a card player muttered, "Town's changing again," Caleb felt her shoulders tense. For a second, he wanted to spin around and knock the man's teeth loose. But he didn't. Instead, he kept his voice calm, deliberately slow. "Folks talk," he said quietly. "Doesn't mean anything." She said nothing, but he saw a flicker doubt or gratitude. He wasn't sure. By the time they reached the inn's porch, something unspoken had settled between them. Not familiarity, not comfort, but recognition of two souls who had spent years staying strong because the world demanded it. Caleb set her trunk down inside. "Welcome to Dusty Creek," he said sincerely. "Hope the place treats you right." Amara's eyes softened a fraction, enough to stir something warm in his chest. They were strangers. But in that small exchange, the story of everything they would become had quietly begun to take shape. The inn at Dusty Creek wasn't much to look at: weather-beaten boards, a faded sign hanging crooked, and windows dusty enough to blur the world outside. But inside, the place carried the scent of wood polish and warm bread, the hopeful effort of someone trying to make frontier life a little gentler. Amara stepped into the lobby, feeling the weight of travel pulling at her bones. She didn't need luxury. She didn't even need comfort. All she needed was a door with a lock and somewhere to rest before facing whatever tomorrow brought. As she approached the counter, the innkeeper, Mrs. Whitaker, a round, silver-haired woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows, looked up in surprise. "Oh my," she said, blinking. "You must be the new teacher." Word traveled fast in small towns, Amara realized. "I am," she replied politely. "Do you have a room available?" Mrs. Whitaker hesitated a flicker so brief most folks would have missed it, but Amara noticed everything. The older woman adjusted her spectacles, glanced at the ledger, and exhaled. "Well, sweetheart, I have a room, one room, and it only has one bed." Amara stared, unsure she'd heard correctly. She had traveled across half the frontier and was now being told the town's only inn didn't even have a spare cot. "One bed?" she repeated. "One," Mrs. Whitaker confirmed with a grimace. Had a pair of ranch hands check out this morning, but they broke the second bed wrestling each other like fools. Haven't had time to replace it yet. Caleb, who had lingered near the doorway as if making sure she got settled, shifted uncomfortably. His voice was gentle when he spoke. "You're welcome to take my room, ma'am. I can sleep in the barn or the saloon." "Don't mind either." Amara blinked, startled by the offer. She barely knew the man. His kindness was unexpected again and unusual for the West, where strangers were more likely to look after themselves first. She gave him a small shake of her head. "No, thank you," she said softly. "I'll take the room as it is." Mrs. Whitaker slid the key across the counter. "If you need extra blankets or a chair to prop against the door, let me know," she offered warmly, though the hint wasn't subtle. The town wasn't entirely safe. Not for anyone, and not for a woman alone. Amara accepted the key with steady fingers. As she climbed the narrow stairs, her suitcase thumping behind her, she couldn't help replaying the innkeeper's tone, concerned, cautious, and maybe even protective. It was strange. She had been in towns where no one cared if she slept on the dirt outside the saloon. Dusty Creek was rough and divided, but at least one woman here seemed to have a heart. The room was small, barely space for a bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the dusty main street. Faded curtains fluttered in the warm breeze. The bed, at least, looked clean, even if it took up half the room. Amara set her things down and let out a long, weary sigh. "One bed," she murmured to herself. "It will do." A knock startled her. She opened the door to find Caleb, hat in hand, eyes lowered politely. "Just wanted to be sure you settled in," he said. "If anything feels off, you can call for me." "I'll be downstairs." Amara studied him carefully. His sincerity was disarming. "Thank you," she replied, "for the help and the offer." He tipped his hat, cheeks faintly flushed, and stepped back. As Amara closed the door, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that the story of that single bed was going to matter far more than she understood, yet quiet thread tying her to this mysterious cowboy long before either of them realized where it would lead. By sunrise the next morning, the news had spread through Dusty Creek like wildfire. The new school teacher was a black woman. In a town where gossip moved faster than horses, Amara's arrival had become the main topic at every breakfast table, saloon counter, and wash station. People whispered with curiosity, judgment, excitement, and fear all tangled together in a way that felt dangerous. Amara sensed it the moment she stepped out of the inn. The morning air was cool, the sky streaked with soft gold, but the looks she received were sharp enough to slice through calm. Some people nodded politely. Others blinked in shock. A few turned their backs altogether. But Amara walked forward with her shoulders square, reminding herself that she had come here to teach children, not to win the approval of those who didn't want change. She headed toward the old schoolhouse, a small wooden building at the edge of town with a crooked bell tower and a dusty yard. It had clearly seen better years. The windows were fogged with grime, and the steps groaned under the weight of time. Still, it was hers now, her new beginning. She was examining the boards of the porch when a voice behind her cut through the quiet. "You'll want gloves if you plan to clean that up." "Plenty of splinters." She turned to see Caleb Hart leaning casually against a hitching post with a rope slung over one shoulder. His horse grazed nearby, tail swishing lazily. The cowboy had a way of appearing just when she needed help uninvited, but never unwelcome. "I've dealt with worse than splinters," Amara replied lightly, though her eyes softened. "But thank you." Caleb studied her a moment, noting the tightness in her jaw. "Town giving you trouble already?" She hesitated. She didn't want to complain or appear weak, but she also didn't want to lie. "Some look at me like I don't belong here," she admitted. "Others look at me like I shouldn't be teaching their children." Caleb's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening with a restrained anger that seemed entirely on her behalf. Folks around here don't always take kindly to new things, he said, voice low. But that doesn't mean you don't belong. Before Amara could respond, the sound of boots crunching gravel drew their attention. 3 members of the school board approached Mr. Halpern, a wiry man with a permanent scowl, Mrs. Crane, thin and sharp-faced, and Mr. Tully, who was more interested in chewing tobacco than anything else. Mr. Halpern didn't bother with introductions. "You're the new teacher?" he asked bluntly. "I am," Amara replied, keeping her tone professional. He frowned. "We were expecting someone different." Amara took a slow breath. "I assure you, sir, my qualifications." He cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Qualifications ain't what I'm talking about. Some parents might not take well to your kind teaching their young ones." Caleb stepped forward before Amara could speak. "Her kind?" He echoed, voice dangerously calm. "You mean someone educated? Someone willing to teach your kids so they don't grow up as ignorant as mule tracks?" Mr. Halpern stiffened. Mrs. Crane sniffed dramatically. Mr. Tully spat in the dirt. "It's not personal," Mrs. Crane said, folding her arms. "We're just thinking of the children." "So am I," Amara replied, her voice steady but her eyes burning. "Which is why I'm here." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Halpern muttered something under his breath before saying, "We'll discuss this further." They turned and walked away, leaving behind a heavy silence. Amara felt her hands shake slightly, but Caleb's presence steadied her. "You handled them well," he said quietly. "I didn't feel like I did." "You did." His gaze held hers. "And I'll handle anyone who thinks they can run you out." For a moment, the world seemed to exhale. The dusty wind brushed past them, carrying away some of the sting left by the confrontation. Trouble had begun to stir in Dusty Creek, but so had something else, something brave, protective, and quietly powerful. And Amara was no longer facing it alone. The wind picked up just after sunset, sweeping across Dusty Creek with a lonely whistle that rattled shutters and bent the tall prairie grass. The town had a way of going eerily silent after dark, no laughter spilling from the saloon, no boots trotting along the boardwalks, no wagons creaking by. Just the endless sigh of wind and the occasional bark of a restless dog. Amara Johnson felt that silence pressing against the walls of her small inn-room. After the tense morning with the school board and the watchful eyes of strangers, she had spent the rest of the day preparing lesson plans, sorting her books, and trying unsuccessfully to ignore the gnawing worry in her chest. She was used to prejudice, but Dusty Creek seemed like a place where dislike could turn into danger without warning. By nightfall, exhaustion pulled at her, but sleep refused to come. She sat on the edge of the single bed, fully dressed, listening to the wind tug at the window. Then she heard it. A soft scrapewood brushing against metal, right at her door. Her breath caught. For a moment she told herself it was just the inn settling. Old buildings creaked, hinges groaned, floors complained. But then came another sound more distinct this time. A slow, deliberate turning of the doorknob. Her blood ran cold. The door was locked. She had checked it twice, but someone outside didn't care. Someone was trying to get in. Amara's mind raced. She had no weapon. No nearby neighbors. No guarantee that anyone downstairs could hear her. "Who's there?" she called out, though her voice trembled. No answer. Just another attempt at the knob, more impatient this time. Panic surged up her throat. Her hand darted to the washstand drawer she'd placed a metal letter opener there earlier. It wasn't much, but it was something. The knob twisted sharply. Amara backed away from the door, clutching the makeshift blade, heart pounding so hard she wondered if the intruder could hear it. Then, through the wood, came a low, gruff whisper. "Open up." Her knees nearly gave out. "No," she whispered fiercely. She rushed to the window too small to fit through. Then to the corner, no escape. Desperation clawed at her chest. The knob rattled harder. Wood splintered faintly as if someone was testing the hinges. And then her voice finally broke free. "Help! Someone help me!" Her scream shot through the inn like a gunshot. Bootsteps thundered up the stairs. Heavy, fast, purposeful, someone who knew how to run in a crisis. "Amara?" Caleb's voice deep, urgent, terrifyingly protective. Relief crashed into her so violently she almost fell to the floor. He reached the door in seconds. "Step back," he commanded. She scrambled toward the far wall just as Caleb slammed his shoulder into the door. The intruder must have realized he was no longer alone because the rattling stopped. Boots scraped quickly down the hallway. Caleb burst into the room after one more hit, his gun drawn, eyes burning with fury. "Where?" he demanded. Amara pointed toward the stairs, breathless. Caleb didn't hesitate. He sprinted after the fleeing figure. Amara heard the chase thunder down the steps, followed by the crash of the saloon doors below. Silence. Then, after a long stretch of fear-soaked minutes, Caleb returned. His chest rose and fell hard, but he looked unharmed. "Coward ran," he growled. Didn't get a look at his face. Amara swallowed, shaking violently now that the danger had passed. Caleb holstered his gun slowly, his expression softening. "You're safe," he said gently. "I'm right here," she nodded, trying to breathe. I didn't want to be alone." Caleb stepped closer, stopping when he was near enough for her to feel the warmth of him. "You won't be," he said quietly. "Not tonight." And for the first time since arriving in Dusty Creek, Amara let herself believe he meant it. After the intruder fled and the innkeeper had apologized half a dozen times, Mrs. Whitaker offered to bring a chair for Caleb to sleep in or even set up a cot in the hallway. But the walls were thin, the night was cold, and Amara still trembled from the shock. Caleb stayed close, not hovering, not overwhelming, just present in the steady grounding way only certain people know how to be. The kind of presence that makes your heartbeat slow down and your lungs remember how to breathe. When Mrs. Whitaker retreated downstairs, Caleb remained by the door, one hand on the frame as if guarding it with nothing but his body and his will. "You don't have to stay," Amara whispered, though her voice held more hope than refusal. Caleb shook his head gently. "After what happened? I'm not leaving you alone for anything in this world." There was no hesitation in his words, no forced heroics, just simple truth. The room had gone cold from the broken door and the harsh wind pressing through the cracked window. Amara's fingers were icy. She wrapped her arms around herself. Caleb noticed instantly. "I can fix the draft," he murmured. He crossed the room, removed his coat, and draped it over the window frame, blocking most of the wind. Then he took the blanket from the chair and handed it to her. But the cold seeped deeper still. Amara shivered again. Caleb hesitated a moment, searching her face. "If you're cold, you're welcome to the bed," he said softly. "I'll sleep on the floor." She looked at the wooden planks. They were uneven, splintered, and freezing. The idea of him lying there made her chest clench. "That's not necessary," she murmured. He lifted an eyebrow. "You sure?" Amara's gaze drifted to the large bed, the one she'd already found awkwardly humorous earlier. Now it seemed impossibly intimate. Yet the thought of being alone in it, after someone had tried to break in, sent a chill through her bones stronger than the wind outside. "It's a big bed," she said carefully. "If we stay on our own sides." Caleb's reaction was immediate. A soft, respectful smile and a nod that revealed his relief. "I promise, Miss Johnson. I'll behave." The way he said it, half teasing, fully sincere, loosened the last knot of fear inside her. They prepared in silence, a quiet rhythm settling between them. Caleb shrugged off his gun belt and boots but kept his shirt and trousers on. He moved slowly, making sure she never felt vulnerable or cornered. Amara climbed into the bed first, pulling the blanket up to her neck. The warmth was welcome, but her racing mind wasn't ready to calm. Caleb lay down next to her, remaining stiff and straight, as if any movement might break the fragile safety of the moment. The cold wind howled outside. Inside, the bed dipped slightly with Caleb's weight, grounding her in a strange new way. Minutes passed before he spoke, his voice low and gentle. "You're safe, Amara. I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." Something in her softened. It had been so long since anyone had said words like that and meant them. She turned slightly, watching the shadows carve gentle lines across his face. "Thank you, Caleb." He exhaled, the sound full of warmth and something unspoken. "You don't have to thank me. I didn't like seeing you scared." Amara hesitated, then said the quiet truth. "I was." Caleb shifted, not to touch her, but to face her a little more. "I know, and I'm sorry you had to feel that. But you're not alone tonight." A deep hush fell between them. Comforting, human, real. The single bed had become a fragile sanctuary in a hostile town. As sleep finally pulled at Amara's eyelids, she felt Caleb still awake beside her, calm, strong, protective. And for the first time since arriving in Dusty Creek, she drifted into dreams knowing someone was watching over her. Morning sunlight spilled through the patched window, faint and pale as though even the sun was hesitant to shine on Dusty Creek after the events of the night before. Amara woke slowly, the memory of fear lingering in her body like a bruise, dull, deep, but no longer sharp. What she did feel, however, was warmth. Not just from the blanket, but from the knowledge that Caleb had kept watch the entire night, staying still and alert beside her until she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. He was gone now, his side of the bed empty, a folded note resting on the pillow. "Went to the sheriff. We need answers. I'll be back." It wasn't a promise made lightly. Caleb didn't make casual promises. Downstairs, the inn bustled with tense whispers. Mrs. Whitaker set a steaming cup of coffee in front of Amara and leaned close, her voice soft with concern. "Honey, folks are talking. Half the town is riled up that someone tried to break into your room. The other half is pretending it never happened. Dusty Creek splits clean as a cracked fence when trouble starts." Amara wrapped her fingers around the warm mug, steadying herself. "Do they know who it was?" Mrs. Whitaker shook her head. "Not yet. But whoever did it, they weren't expecting Caleb Hart to come thundering in like Judgment Day." A small flicker of gratitude warmed Amara's chest. Caleb's presence, his protection, had become something she felt more deeply than she'd expected. But outside the safety of the inn, the town was shifting. When Amara stepped onto the boardwalk, conversations halted mid-sentence. Mothers pulled their children closer. A few ranch hands tipped their hats politely, but many others looked away or glared openly. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town like a question waiting for an answer. Caleb found her halfway there. His expression was set, jaw firm, eyes darker than usual. "Sheriff says he'll investigate," he told her, "but I don't trust it. He's too friendly with certain people in town." "Meaning?" "People who don't want me here." Caleb nodded once. "Exactly." They walked toward the schoolhouse together. At the door, they found three mothers waiting Mrs. Ortega with her two boys, Sarah Jenkins clutching her daughter's hand, and Ruth Miller with her shy twin sons. Their expressions were concerned but kind. "We heard what happened," Sarah said gently. "We want you to know we're with you." Amara blinked, startled. You still want me to teach your children?" "More than ever," Ruth said firmly. "Our kids need someone like you. Someone who doesn't give up." Warmth filled Amara's chest, unexpected, overwhelming. But not everyone felt the same. Across the yard, Mr. Halpern and Mrs. Crane marched toward them with Mr. Tully trailing behind. Halpern's face was red with fury. "This is exactly why you shouldn't be here," he snapped. "Already causing trouble. Bringing danger to our town." Caleb stepped between them and Amara in one smooth, controlled movement. "She didn't bring danger," he said coldly. "Someone threatened her." Mrs. Crane scoffed. Maybe if she left quietly, there wouldn't be any more incidents. Sarah Jenkins gasped. Are you blaming her? Halpern jabbed a finger toward Amara. We're saying Dusty Creek doesn't need outside problems. Or outsiders who don't understand how we do things. Caleb's voice dropped dangerously low. Careful. Tension crackled in the air like a storm ready to break. For the first time, the town was visibly, publicly split, those who feared change and those who welcomed it. Those who saw Amara as a threat and those who saw her as a blessing. Amara felt the weight of all their eyes on her. I came here to teach, she said softly but firmly. Not to divide anyone, but I won't run, not because of threats. Not because of fear. Caleb glanced at her with quiet pride. The mothers nodded. Even Tully looked uneasy. Halpern and Crane exchanged frustrated whispers before storming off. The line had been drawn. Dusty Creek was no longer neutral. And Amara was at the center of a conflict growing thicker by the day, one that would test loyalties, challenge old beliefs, and force the town to choose what kind of future it wanted. But for the first time since arriving, she didn't feel alone. Caleb stood beside her. Family supported her. Courage filled her chest like a rising sun. The town was divided, but Amara was ready. In the days following the confrontation with the school board, a fragile tension settled over Dusty Creek like the quiet simmer of a pot left too long on the fire. People watched Amara and Caleb wherever they went, whispering behind hands, peeking through shop windows, sometimes even stopping mid-stride as the pair passed by. Some of the whispers carried curiosity. Some carried admiration, but far too many carried resentment. Yet amid all that strain, something else was quietly growing, something tender and steady, something neither Amara nor Caleb had planned for. It began with small moments. Caleb walked Amara to the schoolhouse each morning, sometimes in full silence, sometimes sharing stories of ranch life, of broken horses and stubborn steers. Amara listened with unexpected fondness, realizing his gruff exterior hid a gentle heart. Afternoons, she invited him inside the schoolhouse so he could see the children's progress. At first he insisted he weren't much for books, but soon enough he sat with the twins, helping them shape their letters with his big, calloused hands guiding theirs. He didn't notice how Amara watched him, how soft her expression turned when he praised a child or laughed quietly at a student's joke. He didn't see how she pressed a hand against her heart after he left. But the town did, and with every passing day, Caleb's protective stance toward her grew less like duty and more like devotion. One evening, after a long day of teaching and defending her position, Amara found Caleb waiting outside the schoolhouse, leaning against the fence with 2 horses saddled and ready. "You look tired," he said softly. "Thought you could use a break. How about a short ride?" Somewhere quiet. Amara hesitated. She hadn't ridden in years, but she trusted him more than she trusted anyone else in Dusty Creek. So she nodded. Caleb helped her mount, his hands steady at her waist, lingering a second longer than necessary. The touch sent a warm tremor through her. He felt it too, she could tell by the way his breath caught. They rode toward the river, where golden grass swayed like waves and the sky stretched wide and endless. The sunset painted everything in warm colors that made the world feel softer, safer. When they stopped near the water, the silence between them felt different, not tense, not heavy, but intimate. Amara perched on a rock, hugging her knees. "Sometimes I wonder if coming here was a mistake," she admitted quietly. "I wanted to build something meaningful. But instead, I feel like I'm fighting every single day." Caleb's jaw tightened, not in anger at her words, but at the pain behind them. He crouched beside her. "You ain't fighting alone," he said. "Not anymore," she met his gaze. His eyes held no hesitation, no fear of being seen, no uncertainty, just unwavering loyalty. It stirred something deep inside her, something she had buried long ago. the desire to be cherished. "You don't even know me that well," she whispered, almost afraid to say it aloud. He gave a faint, warm smile. "I know enough. I know you're strong. I know you're brave. I know you care about kids more than some folks care about their own kin. And I know someone tried to scare you, but you didn't let them win." Amara inhaled sharply, her eyes stinging. Caleb reached out slowly, gently, and brushed a stray curl behind her ear. His touch was light, reverent, the kind of touch that asked permission without a single word. "If you stay in this town," he murmured, "you won't have to shoulder any of this alone. I'll be by your side." All the way. The promise wrapped around her like warm sunlight. "Caleb," she breathed, barely audible. His thumb traced the edge of her jaw, and for a moment their foreheads nearly touched, the space between them alive with unspoken emotion. Chaos swirled in Dusty Creek. Threats loomed, enemies whispered. But in that quiet moment by the river, Amara and Caleb found something that felt like hope, and the beginning of a love neither had expected, yet both were starting to need. The night before, Dusty Creek had seemed suffocatingly still, as if the town itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Amara Johnson barely slept, her mind tangled with worry for her students, the school, and herself. Every creak of the in-floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, made her flinch. Caleb Hart, however, had been vigilant, pacing outside her door and keeping watch even after midnight, his presence a quiet reassurance that she wasn't facing this battle alone. By sunrise, the town's streets were alive with tension. Dust swirled in the morning light, catching on fence posts and the edges of roof shingles. Word had spread that some townsfolk, dissatisfied with Amara's presence, were gathering, prepared to force her out of Dusty Creek. The threat was no longer whispers and glances, it was real, imminent, and violent. Amara emerged from the inn with Caleb at her side, their steps synchronized, a silent signal of solidarity. Mothers and fathers, neighbors and ranchers who had come to respect her courage, lined up behind her, their children holding their hands tightly. The townspeople who opposed her, mostly men with scowls carved deep into their weathered faces, waited at the center of the main street, a mix of anger and uncertainty etched across them. Caleb's hand rested on his holster, but his posture wasn't aggressive, it was protective. Every eye turned toward him, sensing he was the shield between danger and Amara. He didn't speak yet. He allowed the tension to grow, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. One of the men, bold and reckless, stepped forward. "We've had enough of outsiders telling us how to run our children's lives," he shouted. "You can't stay here." Amara squared her shoulders, keeping her voice calm but unwavering. "I am not here to cause harm. I am here to teach. I am here for the children, and I will not leave because of fear." Caleb's gaze swept the crowd, daring anyone to make a move. His tone was low and commanding, carrying a warning that echoed across the street. "You touch her, you answer to me. And believe me, no one here wants that." A tense silence followed. For a moment, the town seemed suspended in time, caught between confrontation and retreat. Then, slowly, a few of the parents who had been silent stepped forward, placing themselves between Amara and the hostile crowd. Their voices joined hers, strong and unwavering. "She's doing good for our children," one woman declared. "You can't run her out." The support swelled like a tide. More families joined, and even some ranchers who had been indifferent found courage in numbers. The men who had intended to intimidate now hesitated, glances exchanged in uncertain confusion. It became clear. The town's future wasn't dictated by fear or prejudice. It was dictated by those willing to stand for what was right. Caleb relaxed only slightly, still close to Amara, still ready to act. The hostile crowd began to scatter, their confidence shattered by the solidarity of the townspeople. Dust swirled around the retreating feet, but the morning light felt brighter now, as though it too approved of the choice made by those who valued justice over ignorance. Amara exhaled, relief flooding through her, but she didn't smile just yet. Caleb's hand brushed hers briefly, a quiet acknowledgement, a tether in the chaos they had just survived. "You were amazing," he said softly, pride thick in his voice. Amara looked around at the faces, children smiling, parents nodding, allies standing tall, and realized that she had found more than safety. She had found community. She had found a place where courage and kindness could outweigh fear and hatred. For the first time, she felt truly at home. And with Caleb by her side, steadfast and unwavering, she knew that whatever challenges Dusty Creek or the wider world threw at her, she would face them not alone, but with someone who had become her protector, her ally, and perhaps the beginning of her heart's companion. The showdown had ended. Dusty Creek had chosen, and in that choice lay hope, love, and the promise of a future neither Amara nor Caleb had dared imagine before the sun rose that morning. The morning after the showdown felt different. The air in Dusty Creek was lighter, cleaner, as if the town itself had exhaled after a long-held tension. For the first time since her arrival, Amara Johnson could walk through the streets without flinching at suspicious glances or muttered warnings. People still whispered, of course, but now those whispers carried respect and curiosity rather than disdain. The town had been tested, and it had chosen her. Amara stepped onto the dusty boardwalk, her skirts brushing against the sun-warmed wood. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The battle for acceptance had been fierce, but it had also revealed allies she had never expected. Family she had worried might side with fear had instead stood by her, and even those who had opposed her had been tempered by the strength of collective will. Caleb Hart appeared at her side as if summoned by her thoughts. He had spent the early hours speaking with ranchers, reassuring families, and ensuring that no lingering threats would disrupt the newfound peace. Even in the aftermath of the confrontation, his presence was calm and protective, a steady anchor in a world that had so often been unpredictable. "You look like you're ready for the day," he said, tipping his hat in that understated way that made his rough features seem gentler, almost tender. Amara smiled faintly. "I am. And I think Dusty Creek is ready too." Their steps fell into an easy rhythm as they walked toward the inn. The streets were quiet now, children peeking from behind shop doors and mothers watching anxiously, as if the town collectively held its breath to see how the day would unfold. Every glance and nod from the townspeople seemed to whisper approval and cautious encouragement. When they reached the inn, Amara glanced at the familiar doorway, the small wooden room that had been her refuge and, in many ways, the site of her first real bond with Caleb. That single bed, once a symbol of limitation and potential discomfort, had become a quiet haven, a place where fear had been confronted, where trust had been built, and where a fragile seed of intimacy had taken root. Caleb watched her, reading the expressions that she rarely shared with anyone else. "You're thinking about that bed again, aren't you?" he said quietly, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Amara laughed softly, the sound full of relief and warmth. "I am. It feels like—" Everything started there. "And it wasn't bad, was it?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle. "No," she admitted. "Not bad at all." For a moment, they stood side by side in silence, watching the sun climb higher, warming the boards beneath their feet. The danger had passed, but the connection between them had deepened. Quietly, steadily, like roots growing beneath the soil, unseen but unyielding. Caleb reached for her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "Amara, if you stay here, this won't just be about surviving the town. It'll be about living, about building something good. And you won't do it alone." Amara looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the strength in his stance, and the promise in his words. Her chest swelled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper hope, love, and the daring courage to let herself believe that perhaps she had finally found not just safety, but a home. "I believe that," she said softly. "I want that." Caleb squeezed her hand, a quiet affirmation. "Then it's ours, forever." In that moment, Dusty Creek was more than a dusty frontier town. It was a place of beginnings, of second chances, of hearts daring to trust again. Amara knew challenges would come. Prejudice didn't vanish overnight, but she also knew she would face them head on, with Caleb by her side and the town slowly learning the value of courage and compassion. That single bed, the schoolhouse, the dusty streets all became symbols of endurance, trust, and love. And as the morning sun bathed them in golden light, Amara felt a profound certainty. This was more than a victory. It was a new beginning, a life shared with someone who had promised to stand beside her, and the start of their forever Wild West love story. She smiled, heart light, and stepped forward ready for everything that lay ahead.